Welcome to Full Momentum, an HEC-RAS podcast. I am your host, Ben Carey. It's been a little bit, but super happy to be joined today by my colleague and co-host here on Full Momentum, Chris. Welcome back to the podcast, episode number 35.
Thanks, Ben. I can't believe it's 35 already. But yeah, it's been a little bit of a break. We've been busy. You and I have gone on a couple trips recently. A lot of stuff happening.
Yeah.
Hard to get these podcasts out.
Well, I am proud of the fact that up until I think through the month of September, at the very least, I think did an episode every month. And so that was one of the goals of ours, is to be a little bit more consistent this year. And for the first 3 quarters of the year, we accomplished that. But as Chris mentioned, we did quite a bit of teaching this fall. I think Chris and I each taught at least 2 classes. We also had our online class that just ended a few weeks ago. I taught in Boston, in Atlanta, in Chicago. Chris, you also taught in some other places. So it was a busy quarter of teaching. But yeah, I'm super happy to get back on the podcast and talk some HEC-RAS.
I seem to recall there was one point, maybe 1 week, where I actually had 3 classes going at the same time, 2 online and 1 in-person class. And it made for a crazy, few weeks there trying to manage all that. And, we got a regular consulting job too behind all that. So, been wild. But we had some really cool interviews too this year. Some really great guests that we brought on. I think, what did we see? I think we started the year off with our students, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was cool. We had Gene on. And Isha, yeah. So there were some really good interviews. We don't have a guest today, but we have some really good things to talk about.
Yeah. Now, Chris, is that picture behind you real, or is that AI generated?
You can tell, right? The AI images, they have a look. I don't know exactly what it is, but
all the branches have the exact same amount of snow.
That's true. Yeah, but it's cool. And there's a little powerhouse behind with a spillway, so it's kind of appropriate for what we do. So
my background is an actual picture of Norway, but I imagine that your background looks like maybe what a hydro dam in Norway would look like.
Probably this time of year, yeah. Is that one you took?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Do you remember the name of that fjord?
I don't. No. We visited so many, and they all looked very similar and very awesome. So I don't recall the name. But
yeah, Norway is really cool. For those of you who haven't been there, Ben, I think you would agree with me. It's a pretty magical place. A lot of really cool terrain, a lot of great scenery, friendly people, and really expensive food.
Yeah. Great scenery, like you said. Awesome. Well, let's jump into the discussion points for today. Obviously, between the last time that we published a podcast and now, there's been some really, really exciting developments within the HEC-RAS world. Part of the reason that we kind of pressed pause on getting podcasts out is because there was just so much that happened in a short period of time. RAS 6.6 was released. That had stormwater capabilities. Then quickly thereafter, RAS 2025, the new interface, the alpha version of that was released. And there was so much enthusiasm, so much excitement. There was a lot of videos that were getting pumped out by different people looking at the new software, talking about it. HEC had their own videos that were coming out in their own webinars. So we kind of just wanted to let the dust settle on all of that, wrap our heads around what this means for the HEC-RAS community, and then have a little bit of a debrief. And that's kind of going to be the primary topic for today is what's coming, what's new. Many of the talking points that we touch on today, you might be familiar with, but we'll try to put our own spin on it. But yeah, really, really exciting time in the HEC-RAS world. And we're excited to share a little bit about that with you all today. And then our plan for 2025 is to actually cater many of our podcast episodes to some of those new releases. So we're planning on doing an episode that we dive in a little bit more on the mesh generation within 2025 and actually demo how that looks. We'd like to talk to you all about a little bit more in depth of what the stormwater functionality within the legacy version of RAS 6.6 looks like, how that might be used. So be on the lookout for additional in-depth topics. But today is going to be a little bit of a higher level, just kind of overview and discussion. Anything to add to that, Chris, before we kind of continue on?
I was just going to say, I don't know about you, Ben, but with those two releases coming out at the same time, boy, it sure feels overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of new stuff, a lot of stuff to learn. I think for you and me, especially because we kind of have to figure out how we're going to incorporate this into our class and teach people how to use it. You know, there's a lot of stuff to do here coming up. I mean, with 2025, that version, and with pipes, even rain on grid is, you know, the amount of people doing that and wanting to know more about that. There's just a lot to learn, a lot to figure out and understand. I think learning best practices in all these different new features too is going to be a big deal.
Yeah. The one, I guess, solace that I take in all of the noise and energy and new features is it seems like there's more and more resources that are available to people out there, whether it's multiple people that have YouTube channels, whether it's the fact that AGC is coming out with their own videos now and discussing certain points. Obviously, you have a lot of instruction and teaching that's available either online or in person. You have a lot of really cool stuff going on with AI and people sharing what they're finding with that on LinkedIn. So there's a lot going on, but it also seems like there's the RAS community is stepping up, and there's a lot of information that's free and available out there for people to learn from. So that's really cool too.
It's a big change from even 10 years ago. There was really nothing online you could find. And every once in a while a video would pop up, or, you know, I mean, I had the RAS solution, but there just wasn't a lot out there. But there's so much content out there now. And I love the fact that, as you mentioned, HEC is putting out their own content because, you know, they are the developers. They're the experts in how to use the software. And so getting it straight from them is a really nice benefit that we haven't had in the past.
Good. Well, hey, speaking of classes, Chris and I want to make a quick announcement here. So we just opened up registration for our next online 2D HEC-RAS class. This is going to be kind of the standard class that we've been giving over the last couple of years, with a little bit more information on some of our advanced topics like rain on grid. We'll briefly introduce kind of what the 2025 interface looks like, what's coming with that, talk a little bit about what 6.6 includes. But for the most part, it's kind of our standard class that's been really, really popular over the years. So that's going to start in March, mid-March of 2025. It's going to run for that 6-week period that we've been doing our online classes for. And so if you're interested in learning more about HEC-RAS 2D, it's a great time to invest in resources to learn that. One of our big takeaways in kind of reviewing the information that HEC put out about RAS 2025 is, even though there's some huge changes coming within the software, it's still at least a few years away from being fully functional compared to what, you know, the legacy 6 version of RAS is. And so if you're curious about, should I wait to take classes on RAS 2025, or should I go ahead and invest resources and learn how to use 2D now? My opinion is that it's a really, really important to continue to learn how to use the legacy version of HEC-RAS, because it's going to be around for a while. I don't know, Chris, if you agree with that sentiment.
I agree 100%. I think my advice to people would be, if you're looking for training, 6.6X, whatever it is going to be, you know, that's the one that I would get the training on. That's the one I would use on projects. That's going to be around for several more years yet. 2025, there's going to be a transition too, in my opinion. Even when 2025 is fully operational, it's not going to be like everybody immediately jumps to 2025. There's going to be a transition as people get more comfortable with it. But now is the time to practice with it. So you've got the ability to download 2025, get it on your computer, and just start playing around with it. It's not ready for use on projects. In fact, even if you ask the AI chatbot about that, it'll tell you, please don't. Please don't use it for projects. It's meant to play around with, to get used to get comfortable with, so that when it is ready for prime time, you don't have a big ramp up period to get up to speed. You're ready to go almost immediately. And the cool thing about 2025, we'll probably get into this a little bit, is the way they've set it up is they're continually new updates. You don't have to wait like a year for the next version update. It's anytime you open it up, if there's a new update, boom, you download it, you install it right there, and you've got the latest version of the software. So that way they can fix bugs almost in real time. They can add features in real time, and the next time you open up the software, it's there ready for you to use.
Yep, absolutely. Good thoughts there, Chris. If you are interested in signing up for our next online class, which again starts in March of next year, the link to register for that class is now at a new location. It's on our new website, which is rastraining.com. I can go ahead and share my screen so you all can see what this looks like. But RAS Full Momentum Solutions is now hosting these online classes. So this is where you can sign up. Just pop into rastraining.com. You can look at the different options that we have available to you on the main page under courses. If you navigate to that tab, you'll actually be able to add these classes and go ahead and check out and register. Definitely do this as soon as you can. Our last class filled up super fast. And so want to make sure that everybody who is interested in getting this training is able to do so. If it does fill up, we will be offering a similar training later on in 2025. But if it's something that you're interested in getting trained on sooner than later, sign up as soon as you can so that you don't miss out.
Yeah, these classes are fun, folks. I mean, I would highly encourage you, because we're not only giving you content and showing you how to build RAS models 1D, 2D, but we have great conversations with all the attendees. They bring a lot to the table. It really becomes almost an open forum in between our instruction time and the workshop time, where you can bring your questions and we can have a discussion about it. So it's a really good time.
And that's why it's kind of interesting over the years as we've been doing these classes. We actually have quite a few people that will repeat and take the class again. And that's because no class is the same, right? I mean, everybody who comes to the class kind of brings their own experience and questions and kind of guides where the discussion goes. And that's one of the really cool things about it. There's also obviously an opportunity to ask questions about, version 6.6 and RAS 2025, and we carve out time to be able to answer those questions as best we can. So again, if you're interested, sign up today, rastraining.com. I'll include a link in the YouTube video as well. Before we jump into the primary topic for today, I do want to just give a quick shout out to our sponsor for today's episode. We're thankful to be sponsored by our firm, Kleinschmidt Associates, who is known throughout the industry as a firm that provides practical solutions to complex problems affecting energy, water, and the environment. You can learn more at kleinschmidtgroup.com. Even though our online classes are now run through the new website, RAS Solutions, rastraining.com. Chris and I both still work full-time at Kleinschmidt, doing a lot of really, really cool engineering projects over there. So go check out kleinschmidtgroup.com if you want to learn more about where Chris and I work. All right, let's jump into the topic for today. So for those of you who aren't aware, late September, early October, HEC announced that there were 2 new versions that were going to be released almost simultaneously. That was the beta version of RAS 6.6, which included the ability to model stormwater with storm pipes. That was a huge development that we have been hearing rumors about for a long time that was coming. So that was really, really exciting. My understanding is that development within the software was paid for by the Chicago Army Corps of Engineers district. So that's something that they were really interested in being able to utilize. And that's out there right now for people to use. It is beta, but it is functional and people are having some success with it. The other big announcement around the same time was that RAS 2025, the alpha version of that software was released, which again was something that we had heard rumors about, that there was going to be a total overhaul of the interface, the functionality of HEC-RAS, a lot of what we use it for, and kind of how models are built and set up and troubleshooted. That's all staying really, really similar, but some really big improvements that HEC was able to release and do some presentations on as well. So, Chris, before we get into kind of each one of those, what stood out to you overall about that those versions that were released, and what are you most excited about, I guess?
What stood out to me the most was the fact that it was a double up, a 2-4. It's like at the same time we got 2 releases, which has never happened before. Right at the same time, one being the 6.6 version and then the 2025, of course. But to me, for the 6.6, I'll just start with that. You mentioned it, but the stormwater capabilities, this is something that people have been looking forward to for a very long time. And it's been a kind of a deficiency and really a limitation to doing urban flood modeling.
Mhm.
You know, you can make the assumption, and we've done this on projects before, that for the bigger floods, you assume that the stormwater system is at capacity, and so you can kind of ignore it. But even doing that, even in a big flood, you can still have major impacts from your stormwater system on certain areas, especially if you're looking close up at individual locations and how flooding might occur there. So having that ability to put in even just a few pipes here and there to convey water from, one street to an outfall location or something like that. You don't even need to build an entire underground system. But I remember going way back when RAS first came out with 2D, somebody had asked, "Hey, how do we model an underground? A creek basically goes through an underground tunnel under a city." And you really couldn't do it very easily. I mean, you could get creative and maybe build like a 1D reach underneath the 2D mesh, and that's been done before, but it's really tricky and hard to set up. So this opens up the door for a lot of urban flood modeling applications, and I'm really excited about that. I also like, you haven't mentioned this yet, but the porosity elements I think is going to be a really nice additional feature for doing watershed restoration or river restoration modeling, specifically when you're looking at wood structures, putting wood into rivers, whether it's a engineered log jam, or you're choking a river out, or you're putting in semi-porous rock veins or wood veins or whatever. Having this porosity element solves a lot of the problems that we've been dealing with in trying to model those kinds of features. So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to exploring that a lot more too.
Yeah, and for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with exactly what Chris has meant, with what Chris is talking about, um, in previous versions of HEC-RAS, if you wanted to model restoration elements such as engineered log jams, large woody debris, there were kind of only two ways to do it, or yeah,
Hmm.
two good ways to do it, right? One would be to add it in as a terrain modification. Usually that was kind of overly simple, not necessarily gives you the best results inside of that large woody debris if you want some like near field modeling effects. The other option was to use elevated Manning's N values to incorporate the energy losses associated with those features. But with the porosity, it kind of allows you a third option, which maybe actually end up being the best, because there were limitations with both terrain modifications and elevated Manning's M values. So it'll be interesting to see if porosity is a good ends up being kind of the path forward in terms of how people actually model those features.
What I like about the porosity method is porosity is something that you can conceptualize, you can visualize it, you might even be able to measure it in a wood feature. Whereas N values, there's so much uncertainty and subjectivity to picking an N value that you would assign to a wood structure like that in the river. Not to mention there are some issues with shear stress and velocity computations when you use lumped elevated N values
Mm-hmm.
to simulate those kinds of features. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, high hopes for that. I haven't had a chance to play around with it too much, but I'm looking forward to testing that out.
One more comment on the stormwater, and this is just based off feedback that we've heard from other colleagues and friends in the industry that use HEC-RAS quite a bit. If you are going to be doing rain on grid modeling with stormwater modeling, just be ready for those models to take quite a bit of time. Really kind of, we all know that rain on grid modeling is in and of itself quite a bit slower than just generic river modeling, because of the fact that the majority of your cells actually have volume being added to them, and thus require computational resources. When you combine that with kind of the separate computations that are going on in the background tied to the stormwater system, it definitely slows things down quite a bit. So we know some folks that we're working with in Texas that are doing rain on grid modeling with stormwater, and those models are taking quite a bit of time. So just be prepared for that. It's going to be really, really useful, I think, for smaller scale models. But as we kind of grow out in scale, if you're doing really, really large watershed scale modeling, may have to think about some creative approaches to incorporating stormwater.
Yeah, and since you brought up runtime, maybe now's a good time to talk about GPUs, because that's coming, right? That's
Yeah,
coming with RAS 2025.
yeah, that was one of the things that again had been rumored for a really long time. Is that RAS was going to have a GPU option, and it turns out that that's the case. So RAS 2025, not the current alpha version that's released, but the next large release, which I think is scheduled to happen in fall 2025, will have kind of their first cut at a GPU. So that's something that, again, the RAS community has been really excited about for a long time. That will result in models that run quite a bit faster. There'll also be some visual benefits in terms of how graphics are presented within RAS Mapper and results and whatnot. But yeah, a huge improvement. One of the probably headliners on what's coming with RAS 2025 is that GPU component. Chris, I don't know if you can talk a little bit about maybe what RAS uses currently and how a GPU is going to change things for the software.
Well, yeah, the current version of RAS is 6.6, and all previous versions have all run off of a CPU. Central Processing Unit is what it means. It's the old standard chip we've had for decades. Of course, the processing speed and capabilities of these chips have gotten better and better every year, but there's sort of a kind of a high-end limitation that is really preventing us from doing really, really fast processing. And so years ago, as I understand it, HEC started investigating the possibility of using graphical processing units, GPUs. And this is the same kind of technology that's used for gaming. And so it's meant to handle graphical processing really fast, handle tasks very fast, same kind of tasks that you have in HEC-RAS. And this I don't know exactly what the speed benefits are going to be, but we're talking like significantly faster runtimes potentially in RAS. So I'm really curious to see how that shakes out. I think now is the time to start doing some shopping for GPU computers. It's not a matter of switching, there's a switch in your computer, all of a sudden you've got GPU. You've got to get a whole new computer processor. So start thinking about, that GPU computer. Maybe Christmas is coming up, so you can put it on the Christmas list.
Chris, I'm glad you brought that up because that kind of again goes back to one of our points that we talked about at the beginning of this episode, and that is that there's going to be this transition period, right? Some of these benefits and functions that HEC-RAS 2025 is going to offer are going to require some upgrades to the technology that we're using. And so I think that's one of the many reasons, along with experience and exposure and bugs and troubleshooting, that people are going to slow roll this out in the consulting world. There's going to be, I would imagine, some people that for a long time kind of hold on to using RAS version 6.61 or whatever that newest version is of 6.6. Just because of the trust element and because maybe they don't have the computers that can really benefit from the GPU that's coming in 2025. So that'll be kind of a theme of what we're talking about here is, yes, there's some really exciting stuff coming down the pipe. And certainly if you're interested in taking advantage of some of these features, I think it's a great time to invest in a GPU computer. But there's going to be this period of time, at least for the next couple of years, if not longer, in which the legacy version of RAS is still very relevant, being used on projects. It's not going to be a quick switch. And HEC has made clear that they're going to continue to support the version 6.6 version and do bug fixes and whatnot. Most of their updates are going to be focused on the stormwater stuff, so there's not going to be a lot of development going on in other areas of the software. But they are going to support that because they realize that there is going to be this kind of transition period.
Yeah, and just to be clear, so there's no confusion out there, my understanding is RAS 2025 will have GPU, but it will also maintain the option to do a CPU run as well. So it's not like you have to get GPU, but you're going to want it.
You're going to want it, yeah, exactly. Yeah. The benefits of it are really going to be not necessarily a majority tied to, but definitely a large portion of the benefits are going to be tied to computational improvements. So. All right, this is where I kind of wanted to jump in from 6.6 to the webinar that HEC-RAS put on right after the release was announced. So a bunch of the HEC crew jumped on a live webinar, which is still available to watch on YouTube. We'll include a link to that video in this episode, so if folks are interested. It was a really well put together presentation. They covered on a lot of different stuff from, why RAS was rewritten, what are the benefits of that, what does the new interface look like, how are new meshes generated within the software, and what's the general timeline? What can people expect from a functionality standpoint? So highly encourage everybody, if you haven't already, to go check out that video. And we just wanted to do a quick review on that. So the first item that they touched on was why the need to rewrite RAS in the first place. And they did a great job of kind of illustrating how RAS as a software has evolved over time, from a very simple 1D stick model to something that had georeferenced capabilities, to 2D, to stormwater, and now eventually the jump over to RAS 2025. And the conclusion was that, they've kind of taken the software as it's currently written as far as it can go. And, by making this change in terms of the code, adding in GPU, other things like that, there's really another level that they can take the software as they continue on in development. So this change they felt like was necessary. And it's going to be a huge benefit long-term to the user base and what sort of projects RAS can be used for. I mean, Chris, you can probably speak to this when you were using RAS way back when, but it started off very limited in terms of what the application of the software was. And it's slowly grown over time to be able to model a lot of different types of situations. Obviously, 2D was one of the biggest changes in that front. But the change to 2025 is going to open up just a whole nother level of what can potentially be used here.
Yeah, I think one of the big forks in the road in the past was incorporating GIS capabilities, geospatial capabilities into RAS. At that point, RAS Mapper became a thing. And I mean, even before that, we were doing GeoRAS as an extension to ArcGIS. But when RAS Mapper came on the scene, now all of a sudden it became evident that there was something was going to have to change, because here we had this old legacy geometry editor and we had RAS Mapper, both of them kind of overlapping and doing a lot of the same things. But RAS Mapper was becoming much more, easier to do things, tasks, than the geometry window was kind of becoming old and clunky and outdated. But there's still a lot of stuff you have to do in there. So it was kind of getting to the point where, all right, what do we do? Do we abandon the geometry window and go with RAS Mapper, or the other way around, or just combine the two? And I think that was a big fork in the road as well. In addition to, all the other things you mentioned as to why, it's time to rebuild this thing. Let's start from ground up and get something brand new.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that begs the question, why release an alpha version? You can probably speak to, Chris, that it's pretty rare for HEC to release alpha versions to the public, but they documented in the webinar that there were specific reasons for that. And it was really twofold. The first was just to allow the community to start getting comfortable with what this is going to look like. It is very different from what the current HEC-RAS legacy version looks like. So giving folks a couple years to get used to how this looks, how it works, is going to be a real benefit for when the full functional version comes out, to be able to jump in and use it right away on projects. That was the first reason. The second reason is, anytime you totally overhaul code for software that is this complex, there's going to be a lot of bugs, right? There's going to be a lot of issues that HEC is going to have to troubleshoot and fix. And so getting the alpha version out to the general public allows them to have kind of a bunch of free software developers that are working for them, right? People that are testing things out, breaking the software, reporting the bugs, and I think makes that process a lot more efficient for HEC. So those were the two things that they specifically pointed out in the webinar of reasons why they released this alpha version. And so for that reason, get in there, get used to it, try some things out. If you find some bugs, there's a really slick bug reporting option that's built right into the software. That's new. So anything, Chris, that you kind of took away from that note in terms of why they released the alpha version?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, just to get more participation, but also this is such a different thing that to get people used to it as well. Yeah, normally in the past, alpha versions were sent out to kind of just a select group of folks that have a relationship with HEC, just to kind of keep things more contained. and manageable. But now I think that they're like, hey, let's get input from everyone. Let's crowdsource this thing and make it as best as we can. And one of the great things about how they set this up is that when people do find bugs, they can fix it in real time, and you can
Mhm.
see almost immediately, assuming that they can get to it. I mean, they're very busy people like everybody. So there's a priority list on fixing bugs, but let's say you submit a bug, in theory, they could fix it that same day and put out a new release, and and it's not even a new release. It's just like a patch update or something
Yep.
where, the next time you open up the software, it says, hey, you can update this. It's got these new, bug fixes in there, and then off you go.
Yeah, that was one of the really cool things I noticed that was kind of buried in terms of the notes on what was coming, but you're not going to necessarily have to go back to HEC's website to download the newest version every time something comes up, right? It's all kind of patched into the software. It's just a one click. You don't even have to keep track of LinkedIn to know when the new versions are out. It's going to automatically tell you when you open up the software. So there's some real cool improvements that HEC's put a lot of time into. So again, if you like HEC-RAS, using it as a software, definitely get in to get used to 2025. But it's also a way to help out the HEC team in troubleshooting and debugging their software. So take advantage of that. The next topic
Yeah.
that HEC presented on in that webinar was on kind of just reviewing the interface. So it's a very different view of HEC-RAS. They really were focused on making the software even more GIS centric. So when you open it up, it really had that spatial component. It wasn't something that you had to, click on a button to get to the spatial view. It's kind of automatically right there when you first open up the software, which is really cool. There's also example projects that are built in when you open up the software. One of the options is, hey, do you want to open up an example project? And that's really cool because you can see what the mesh looks like when it's generated automatically. You can play with the example projects to kind of mess around with the mesh that they have in there. So that was a really cool component. Also noted that, in the new RAS 2025 interface, when you click on a layer, whether it's your 2D mesh, whether it's a terrain, whether it's a flow file, each of those layers have visual components that come up on the right, as well as, modeling components. And so it's really easy to distinguish, okay, which of these features is just going to display how things look and which are going to actually change how the model runs. So there's some really cool functionality there that I noticed as well. The terrain development and bringing in terrains, merging to different terrain data sets is super cool. That's all done kind of on the fly. So you can actually bring in multiple terrain data sets, and then you can actually reorganize the priority if you don't like, what has the highest priority or whatnot. And you don't have to generate a new terrain. That can be done inside of the existing terrain. So some really cool stuff. Chris, what stands out to you about kind of just the new interface of the software overall? And as you're speaking, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, pull that up. For me, it's just the look of it. It's extremely different than what we're used to. In fact, when I first opened it up, I was like a little confused on how to get started. But once you figure that out, it's actually really easy. But it's super clean. I mean, it's a very attractive interface. It's very clean. It's very neat, simple. That's what I love about it. You can kind of see everything right here in one screen, where it used to be you'd have to have multiple windows up all the time. I can't tell you how many times I've had, 10, 15 windows all open up all over on my multiple screens and hiding behind things and trying to find them. So this is really nice to kind of keep things nice and compact, easy to work with. But yeah, I like the look of it. I like the cleanliness of it. The organizational aspect. I like the tree view on the left, which we're kind of used to from RAS Mapper, and so that's nice, but it looks cleaner. Now, some of that is because there's not a lot in here yet.
Sure.
It is a very brand new version. It's very bare bones. They've just got kind of the minimal stuff you can do inside of it, and that was intentional by them. They're going to continue to add more and more features, and we can talk to that here coming up. But I'm hoping that even with more features, it keeps this clean, kind of easy to use look. Plus, the other thing that jumps out, and we can see this clearly here in the image, is the sort of implied preference of triangular elements by HEC. And I don't know, Ben, I missed the part where they talked about this on their webinar, but I'm curious to know if you picked up on, what their thought process is to moving towards triangular versus, the legacy version of RAS starts with structured squares or rectangles basically, and then you can destructure it or unstructure it from there. But triangles were never a thing. Now it's clear that triangles are kind of what they're preferring.
Yeah,
We do.
let's save the mesh topic for a second. I just want to point a few other things out to people just on the interface view. So when I mentioned the fact that there's kind of the components, the modeling components, and then the layer view. So for instance, like if I click on this mesh element, right? We have our layer, which is going to change how this mesh is actually displayed, the color of the individual cells, all that. And then you have the components, right? So this is going to be what actually is impacting what is used in the hydraulic model itself. And this is available for any feature within your project. If I click on the terrain, same thing, right? We have our different terrain layers. You can see we've actually merged multiple terrains together for this particular example project. And when I told you that you didn't have to regenerate a mesh to kind of reorder the prioritization, you can just drag any of these and move them up or down, depending on what you want to be higher priority for that particular terrain. So that's really, really cool. So again, this is kind of what impacts the actual model computations. And then if you click on the layer view, this is going to be very similar to the layer view that we were all used to in RASMAP, where we can change the color ramping, how things are displayed. So a really cool improvement. You can also change from light mode to dark mode. And once again, Chris and I are going to plan on spending some time in 2025 walking through some of these things in individual episodes, but mostly wanted to give you guys just a flavor of what this looked like visually. To transition, I guess one thing before I transition, I wanted to point out, they did mention that one of the improvements that they made is that the NLCD database is now automatically downloadable to any project. That was one thing that, not to throw HEC under the bus, but I'm not a huge fan of. I know that they did that just because a lot of people do use the NLCD database for RAS modeling. One of the things that we talk about in our class is that layer it's so coarse that for 2D modeling, it's not really that great to use. Oftentimes your river channel is actually just not even included in the land classification database. You get kind of wonky results as you zoom in and look at kind of individual modeling elements. So not a huge fan of them adding that in automatically, because I actually am worried that people will be over reliant on using that for defining their Manning's M values as opposed to building that out themselves. So not sure if you have any thoughts on that, Chris.
Yeah, looking at like this example that you're showing right here, this scale, I would never use NLCD for this. I would draw my own polygons. You have more control over it. You're not at risk at missing some critical areas. I mean, obviously you can always override your NLCD. So some people like to bring that in as kind of a secondary base level M value definition, and then augment that with some additional polygons. But frankly, I preferred, for a model like this that we're looking at, just build my own. Now, I think where NLCD can really help out is when you're doing these large watershed level models, rain on grid models, where it would just be an enormous task to try and discretize everything with your own polygons. And so I think there's a place for it. And the fact that they make it automated in here, I think that's great. You don't have to use it, but it's in there. And if you do want to make use of it, you can. Might not be a bad idea, even just as a matter of practice, to have that in as a base level and then build your polygons on top of that. Yeah. That way, if you're missing something, you've got something a little bit more. But, Ben and I always talk about keeping things simple too. So, maybe you want to avoid doing that if you're just trying to keep things nice and simple.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't want to criticize UGC. They've done a great job with this, but that's one thing that I'm like, I'm not sure if I would have done that, because I worry about people being too reliant on the NLC.
Yep.
Let's transition to the mesh discussion, because Chris brought that up, and obviously that's the other big development here, besides the GPU, the interface, is the way in which you draw 2D meshes and 1D reaches, to be honest, are completely different in RAS 2025. Now they're very different, but I think from everybody's feedback and the examples that HEC's walked through, it's quite a bit better than the original legacy version of 2D mesh development. Basically, the way in which you draw mesh, and again, we're going to demo this in probably our next episode, but it's just a series of arcs, which can be, inform break lines or refinement regions. That's kind of a way to think about them, or polygons, which define your different regions of your mesh. And within your different regions, you can use different types of cells, different orientations of cells. There's a lot of customization that you didn't have beforehand. Polygons and regions can be triangles, squares, quads, which are actually flow aligned cells, which is really cool. You can have curved cell edges. All of the edits within the 2D mesh are reproducible, so there's not the option to do hand edits anymore, and that's really cool because they've added enough tools to where you don't need to do hand edits anymore. There's going to be some kind of notifications that software produces for you when you set up a 2D mesh, kind of letting you know which areas maybe you need to do some edits or whatnot, just to help improve that process. 1D and 2D is going to be integrated seamlessly. You're not going to have any longer your lateral structures that are needed to connect 2D areas to 1D reaches. That's all going to be done as part of the mesh development. So some really, really cool stuff. I'm going to pop open one of the screenshots I took from the presentation, which kind of talked about the different mesh types that are going to be available. So again, you see here, this is the traditional Cartesian mesh development. This is going to look very similar to what folks are used to seeing in the legacy version of RAS 2D. This is still available to you if that's what you want to use. You have the triangular option as well, which you can see allows you to have a little bit more detail in some of your areas that are maybe changing more with terrain, and then less definition in those areas that are flatter. This looks very similar to a tin. One of the things I haven't heard, Chris, is are you going to be able to use tins in the new RAS 2025? Are you still going to be restricted to using grids? Because this would seem to tie in really well with tins.
Good question. Good question.
Yeah, not sure on that. And then you have your quadrilateral option here, which again allows you to kind of have your cells oriented in the direction of flow automatically. That's really slick. So again, these are going to be enforced based on your arc shapes that you've added in, and then you kind of have this hybrid option, which kind of combines quadrilateral, but then also gives you the ability to vary the number of cells within this polygon, depending on if your channel is wider or narrower. So a lot of different options that are going to be available to you. This is really cool, and also might be a little bit overwhelming to people that are used to just picking a cell size and moving on from there. So
yeah, it looks to me like kind of the convention here is if you've got a good idea of the direction of flow, for example, a river that you can clearly see, you would define that with quads or hybrid. Otherwise, like out in the overbank where water kind of spreads out unpredictably, then you're looking at triangular. Or again, I'm not sure if triangular is now become the preferred over Cartesian, and if so, for what reason, but it seems to be that that's the way HEC is building their models anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more discussion around that, and maybe we can test some things out for in our tutorial in terms of what that looks like and what the benefits might be. But some really, really cool developments around meshing in 2025.
The other cool thing I like about this, Ben, if I could jump in real quick, is the conceptual mesh. Basically, unlike the legacy version where you just draw your 2D boundary around the whole thing, and then you got to start doing all the work with break lines and refinement regions and manual edits potentially. Here you're building a frame. That's what the conceptual mesh is. It's a frame, and then within those frame elements, RAS will fill in the mesh that you choose automatically. And I assume, I haven't heard any discussion on this, but I assume this gets rid of cell violations, the red dots that we so often saw or see in the current legacy version. That gets rid of that, and I think you had mentioned that it even gives you hints at hey, maybe this is something you can improve over here. And there's, in fact, I think you also mentioned, and I didn't catch this in the video, but they don't allow hand edits anymore. So no manual edits anymore. So that's interesting too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mentioned also that one of the big things that I noted was, that there's not many lateral structures anymore, right? That the 1D and 2D is going to talk to each other. So the way that that's done, if you're curious, is you have these different areas. So for instance, you have your main channel here, which you can see has been defined with quads, and then you have your overbank areas in this model that have been defined with triangles. Basically, what you can do is you can assign this polygon, which is representing the channel. You can change this from 2D quads to 1D cross sections, right? And then this whole polygon is just going to be represented with 1D cross sections that defined spacing that is either user defined or can be automatically generated. So a lot of flexibility. One of the other reasons that they did this is they wanted people to be able to do sensitivity analysis on specific areas, which I think was a really, really slick idea. So instead of varying the cell size within your entire mesh by you know um, plus and minus 50% to get an idea of how cell size impacts your results, you can say, I want to do a sensitivity analysis just on my main channel area because that's maybe my focus of my study. I want to see how that would impact my results. Or I'm good with how my main channel is set up. I want to do a sensitivity analysis on my floodplain cell sizes. The way that they've set this up makes it really easy to distinguish between those different areas and potentially approach sensitivity analysis a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's really cool.
One of the other real cool things about how, and again, this is part of the reason why I think they released version 6.6 and RAS 2025 at the same time, is they recognize that these mesh improvements would be really nice to have in a fully functional RAS model that has structures and bridges and troubleshooting and all the things that we know and use as consultants. And so what HEC has allowed, one of the options that Cam does a great job of walking through in that webinar, is you can actually export a mesh that you generate in new RAS 2025 into version 6.6 and use that mesh in 6.6 to run your models. So if you like the way that this meshing looks, the benefits that come with being able to separate out your different areas, whether it's your channel or your floodplain, you can actually build your mesh in 2025, bring it into version 6.6, and run the model with all the fully functional structures. So really, really, really cool opportunity to kind of, again, get people used to developing their meshes in 2025 while still having that legacy software that we know works.
Yeah, I see huge benefits there for especially main channel. When you're talking about minimum cell width going across, aligning your cells into the direction of flow, it's going to be much easier to set that up here in 2025 and import it into 6.6 than to build that in 6.6 right now. So yeah, I see huge benefits there. That's great.
Yeah. Anything else, Chris, on meshes before we transition to just talking about timeline a little bit?
No, I mean, we're going to talk more about this in future webinars, maybe do some demos on setting up meshes, but there's a lot to learn here. There's a lot more capability, I think, in this new 2025 version for setting up your mesh. So overall, really excited to give this a whirl.
Yeah. So the last topic that they covered was on the timeline, which is obviously probably the thing that I think people in the webinar were most interested in is when is all this coming? When can I use RAS on my project? And the answer on the webinar as well as in the software, if you ask it in the little chat bot there, is don't use this for real projects yet. It's not ready. It's mainly, again, an opportunity for users to help HEC in debugging the software and to get used to meshing and how that's going to look. They did release a timeline of when different features are going to be available. And this is all based on fiscal year. So I think they said that ends, or, September 30th is kind of when you can target these releases to be. So fiscal year 2025 would be, early fall 2025, and then early fall 2026, and then finally early fall 2027. These are obviously all TBD in terms of whether HEC is able to meet their goals, but this is kind of what they're shooting for. So we'll take them at their word for now. I want to point out again, as of right now, the alpha version kind of only has the interface available as well as the meshing. It doesn't have any structures that can be incorporated. It doesn't have the GPU solver that they're planning on adding in.
Doesn't have 1D either. Yeah.
Doesn't have 1D. Yep. So fiscal year, the goal is, according to HEC, by the end of 2025 or in fall 2025, we'll have some improvements to the mesh generation, precipitation, so rain on grid data, as well as wind and atmospheric pressure components will be available to us. basic structures. So that's not going to include bridges, for instance, basic terrain modifications, the improved version 6 model importer, 1D, 2D hybrid solvers, as well as, again, that initial GPU solver, which, again, I would assume is not going to be quite as robust as what that final release is going to look like, but that's coming in 25. And then 26, so about a year later, that's when you'll have all the terrain modification options that we have available to us now, as well as maybe some new ones. We'll see what HEC comes up with. Most structures will be available to us by then, according to HEC. So that's going to include gates, bridges, and pumps. All of our mesh post-processing tools, that's going to be some of those notifications, right? Hey, we noticed that this area can be improved, make some changes here. Those sort of notifications are going to be incorporated by the end of 2026. Our advanced 1D solver and mesh enhancements, improved boundary conditions, initial conditions, and then dam and levee breaches will be available to us in that next release. So anything about those first 2 years, Chris, that stand out to you in reviewing the timelines?
Well, what stands out the most to me is just these things are going to be incremental over several years. I mean, there's a lot more to add into it. It's a real bare bones version at the moment. What I'm looking forward to is the breaching in particular, because we do a lot of dam breach modeling here. So it'll be very interesting to put together one of these for dam breach modeling. But yeah, the GPU though, to me is the big one. I can't wait to give that a try and see what kind of benefits we're going to get from having a GPU solver.
Yep. And then it looks like their final release, or the goal for a final release in the end of 2027, is going to include maybe not like real meat in terms of what the software can do, but maybe just some improvements in terms of functionality, sensitivity analysis framework, project management features, things like that, right? So hopefully by the end of 2026, which is kind of what Cam hinted at in the comments, I was reviewing some of the questions and responses, and Cam was responding to those. And he was saying that their goal is to have RAS 25 be as functional as the legacy versions by the end of 2026. So again, we're thinking about 2 years out is what they're shooting for, assuming there's no delays or whatnot. But that's the general timeline that they're shooting for. And obviously, if there's developments between now and then, we'll make sure everybody's aware of those.
So everybody's got 2 years, 2 years to practice.
That's
right.
Be
ready.
And Chris, I don't want to speak for you, but I think, we both agree that our goal is with the classes that we teach, that over time, as we have a chance to play around with some of these new features and the new interface, that we will kind of slowly start to integrate some of that stuff into our class, into our workshops. So if you're interested in taking our training, some of this stuff will be kind of slowly integrated into that. And as Chris mentioned, we're also going to be doing episodes every month in 2025. And I would imagine quite a few of those will maybe cover specific subtopics of either version 6.6 or the new RAS 2025 release.
Exciting times.
Exciting times indeed. Anything else, Chris? Again, I'm sure a lot of people were hoping that we got a little bit more in depth into this episode. That'll be coming in 2025, but we wanted to make sure that we got an episode out before the end of the year. Again, as a reminder, if you're interested in signing up for RAS 2D instruction, we just released our registration for our next class, which is going to be starting in March of 2025. Go to rastraining.com if you're interested in taking that class. That's all I got, Chris. Anything else for folks before we depart?
Yeah, I'd love to hear people's opinions and thoughts and feedback on this new 2025 and even the new stuff in version 6.6. So if you've got stuff you want to share with us, or you got questions or even topic ideas, please put them in the chat, the comments below this video, and we'll try to work them in. But yeah, a lot to come.
Yeah, and definitely, if there's particular topics or subtopics within 2025 or RAS 6.6 that you're interested in learning more about, include those questions in the comments too. That might kind of inform where Chris and I go with our different podcast topics.
Yep, absolutely.
Sweet. Well, Chris, this has been great. Thanks again for hopping on before Christmas. I hope everybody who's listening to this has a wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas if we celebrate. And it's been a great year for Full Momentum.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to more.
Sweet. All right. Well, this has been Full Momentum and HEC-RAS podcast. We'll see you all in the new year.